We are recording. Awesome.
Hey,
Finally. Hello, Dr. Colleen. How are you?
fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. Is that your phone?
No, that was my computer. So
That was your computer? Oh, okay.
yeah,
All right.
there we go.
Awesome. So I so appreciate you being on the show today. You know, I'm a big fan of chiropractics, but before we get into the depths of chiropractics, you just give me a little bit about your background and your qualifications for the people watching the video or my listeners.
Okay, so yes, am a chiropractor. I specialize in sports chiropractic, but treat a little bit of everything, from newborns to older population. I studied in France. I did chiropractic in France, so I can speak French and English. And I actually grew up in Mississauga and started off by going away to school in the US, where I got my undergraduate degree. And I was fortunate to have a scholarship for track and field to do that. And then from there, I found my way in France. I was supposed to go to school in Atlanta, actually. I pre-applied and was pre-approved, but ended up in France, and I don't regret it. School was cheaper, but very good education, and it helped me to improve my French a lot. So.
Yeah. So that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you is like, how did you end up in France? And, you know, reading your bio that you had a full ride in Iowa. And then it's like, okay, there's so many good schools. I've known a lot of Canadians who can't get into Memorial, end up going to either like Chicago, Dallas, New York, or seems to be the ones that everybody goes to.
Yes.
And then you go to France, and I was like, why did she go to France? And then my brain was thinking, is there a big difference between the teaching in France and then the teaching in North America? Is there a really big difference between the two thoughts of schools versus chiropractor?
I think we'd have to ask my colleague, Dr. Trim, that, but I think based on what she's told me, I think there has been some changes. We might be a little bit more old school in the way that they taught in France, but France on a whole has a different form of teaching than they do here. And I discovered that with my kids. Bringing them back here, I've seen that school is not as strict, not as structured here. So I think it's just their way of doing things that makes it a little bit more different than what we do here. But on a whole, what I love about chiropractic is that you can almost go to any school in the world. And as long as the school's accredited, so I made sure to pick a school that's accredited, so I could come home from work if I wanted to. It's kind of important. If you pick a school that's accredited, on a whole, there's some basic things that they have to teach, so it remains the same. But like in any school, once you get a certain set of teachers, you can get two people that go to the same school, but everybody takes something different from it. So I think in the end, it all depends on what teacher you get and how they transmit that information to you. But on a whole, I think it's just a little bit more structured and maybe a little bit more medical based in France, just because they were not, chiropractic in France was illegal up until 2002.
What?
So
really?
Yeah. So it's not that.
That is, I'm like shocked. Like, I did not know that. That is really, really interesting. So why was that? Like,
because they thought of it kind of the way it was here in North America. They thought of it as being practicing medicine illegally. So I actually have colleagues that graduated maybe 5 years before me, 10 years before me, and they would tell stories of how they would still go to court until after a while they'd see the same judge, they'd be fine, and then after a while, as time went on, the judge just threw out the cases and was just like, it's okay, like we're not going to charge you anymore, just because it became too ridiculous. You know what I mean? But like, they have stories of going to court and paying fines of 12,000, 10,000, 20,000 euros because the doctor decided to take them to court for practicing medicine illegally. So it's only been since 2002 that there's a law that says it's no longer illegal. And it's only since 2012, I think, so almost 10 years later, that we actually got a law stating exactly what we can and cannot do. Before, it was just kind of an open book, but at least we couldn't be taken to court.
That is
So
so, like, I'm really blown away. I did not know that. Like,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but they still had schools teaching it, but I
Well, there's
mean,
only one. There's only one in France.
there's only one. Is that the one that you went to
That's
in
the one I
Paris?
went to, called IFEC, Institut Franco Européen de Chiropratique, and it's only one. What I'm impressed with is all of my teachers, the ones that went to school back in the day. So the school opened in '83 in a basement. Okay, so we're
Wow.
talking about the hardcore believers. Most of the ones that started the school had all come to school either in Canada or in the US. So they were doing it because they loved it and they wanted to practice this at home. They said, well, why don't we create our own school? Or some of them went to school in England at AECC, Anglo-European Chiropractic College in Bournemouth.
So was France the only European country that didn't recognize it, or was there other countries too as well? Like, I mean, was it Germany's, Spain? Well, obviously
Um,
England, I mean, they have it,
yeah,
but is there any other European countries that kind of go, yeah, this is a little bit of quackery. Let's,
From my recollection, around the time that France started to get better, most of the other countries started to get better as well. Now, I mean, Italy was a place that has a lot of actually Americans and Canadians that went over to Italy, that left North America to practice there because they were a little bit more respected. They had laws, but they have huge clinics in Italy. Spain wasn't too bad, but there was limits on what you could do. But I think France was the worst from what I recognize. Germany wasn't too bad because a lot of the people in my school, especially the ones that graduated a year or two before me, most people didn't stay in France. They all fled and went to Spain, went to Germany for those who spoke German, or they went to Italy. And
yeah.
those were the main places that they went to. Some didn't go to England just because they had a board exam, and sometimes it was hard to pass that board exam. So they kind of avoided countries that had board exams. But
That's really
yeah,
interesting.
most of the people left. Some people, I mean, of course, about half stayed, but there was a huge population that left.
Yeah. So they just figured I'll get the education. It's a lot cheaper.
Yes.
Again, students are students. Doesn't matter where you are in the world or what you're taking. It's all about budget. There's only so
Exactly.
much. Yeah. It's,
And
if
I,
it's
and I
coming
didn't
at,
even mean to go to school in France, honestly. I
so
was supposed to go to school.
how did you end up in France then? Like,
Well, it's kind of a funny story, and I forget about it until I start talking to people. But once I had my scholarship, my last year, I had that extra year where you only have a half a year to finish. But for sports reasons, I had an extra season to compete. So I still don't even know how I managed it, to be honest, but I got them to pay for my full year. And for that first half of that year, because I only really needed a half a year to graduate, I got them to pay for me to do an exchange program. So I was still in school, but I did an exchange program to France, to the south of France. I went to a small village called Pau. And so that's where I really improved my French, did French classes. Of course, you meet a boy, and then you come back, you graduate, and you're like, well, do I come back to Canada or what do I do? So I'm young. I went back to France, and that's where I discovered a chiropractor. I was saying, oh, I want to see a chiropractor. I want to see a chiropractor. And I couldn't find any, nobody knew what I was talking about. And then one day I saw this plaque, because in France and Europe, usually they have plaques on the outside that say for doctors or whatever. And that's where I saw it. I was like, oh, chiropractor. And I went to see this lady and she started talking to me, and they had flyers of the chiropractic school there. And strangely enough, those flyers were in English. Anytime I talk to anyone about that, they say, no, there weren't. We didn't make any flyers in English. I said, I swear you did. Because if I didn't see that flyer in English, I probably never would have tried. And then the rest is history. So I
wow.
ended up applying and I went to school and then I graduated.
The synchronicities involved for that to happen are
Right?
it's amazing. It was meant to be, like, literally
Yeah.
meant to be.
And
And
that's what I say. It was meant to be, because I honestly walked past that same path every day for 5 months, 4 or 5 months. And I never saw that plaque. I never saw it. And then one day I happened to lift my head up and I saw it this one day and I was like, oh. And then I called and made an appointment for myself and then started telling her that I wanted to go to chiropractic school. And then she started telling me about the school and raved about it. And like I said, the rest is history. I went out
wow.
and found the information,
Well,
and there it
I'm
was.
certainly glad that you went to be a chiropractor, because I've had a treatment from you and it's awesome. And that's one of the things I've
Thank you.
always had conversations with people about chiropractics, and I'm a big firm believer of it. it's helped me for many, many years on various different ailments, and whether it's, training injuries or illnesses in general. First
Mhm.
thing I usually do is I go to a chiropractor and get adjusted. And that's the philosophy that I grew up with the chiropractors I had, very old school. If you get a sickness or you get a disease, and if you get it treated enough, quick enough, that you can alleviate the time that we'll call a downtime of being
Mhm.
ill or the injury so much quicker. Like I remember times where I've had like the flu
Mhm.
before we had COVID.
Yes.
And his philosophy was that I can get adjusted once or pay for once, I should say, but get adjusted many times during the day. So I'd go back twice. So I go in the morning and then in the afternoon. Instead
Mhm.
of being down for 10, 15 days, maybe I'd be down for 3 days max,
Yes.
just from just continually being adjusted. It's
Yes.
absolutely unbelievable. Wow. That's what I
I
love
wish
about
more people
chiropractic.
understood that, because that is definitely the idea of keeping optimal health. Often people ask me, "Oh, yeah, she healed me," and I was like, "No, I didn't heal you. My job was to help your body heal you, because if we don't have our immune system and our body is not in a good shape to heal itself, then nobody can heal you. Even your regular doctor, even the medicines you're taking, majority of them, they're not really healing you. They're either slowing down the bacteria so that your body has time to reorganize and get the little fighters together so they can heal you, or your body is just tired. And as we know, when we get tired, we're unable to resist. We're grumpy and we get ill quicker. So chiropractic, the whole purpose of it is to help your body to be in optimal health, whether it be everyday person or an athlete, to keep them in good shape. Fine tuning.
Yeah. Now, are you still finding people to be more reactive versus proactive when it comes to chiropractic? Like most times actually working with Dr. Trim, I've seen a lot of people, it's more of a reactive. I got a bad back, I need to go see a chiropractor. But they don't do really any preventative. Like it's not like a continuous maintenance on it. They just kind of basically do that.
Know
Go
if you
ahead.
can still, it got stuck for a minute. You were in the
Yeah.
middle of the
Yeah. I just noticed that. I was like, going, is that me or is that you? But,
I don't.
well,
Yes. So based on, I'm not sure where you stopped, but you did mention, or do I find people more reactive or more in prevention? And I find, unfortunately, people are still very reactive.
yeah.
And
So,
that's in everything. It's not even just with chiropractic. Even if their GP tells them you got to do this, or you got to take this, we've gotten into this cycle of I'm fine, so why do I need to do anything? But it's what I find is funny is that people, and I usually use this comparison, and then people seem to say, "Oh yeah, that's true. Your car, a brand new car, is supposed to be great, in shape. We tell you you got to go take it for an oil change once a year." You're thinking, well, why do I got to do that? Why do I got to take it in for maintenance? The car is brand new. Well, because it's prevention. You don't want to wait till that car breaks down on the side of the road and then you're stuck. And people are willing to do that, but for their body, it's like, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. Even when they're walking with a half a half a limb that can't move, they're still like, no, I'm good, until it gets to the point that they can't move at all. And then that's when they're coming in and they want to get fixed now.
yeah.
So unfortunately, because it's very reactive, before coming back to Canada, I don't have to say it as much, but before coming back to Canada, I started telling my patients that I'm not a magician. So you've had this pain for a year. So it's not coming to see me after once or twice over a 2-week period that it's all going to go away. So sadly, yes, people are still reacting as opposed to being proactive about their health. I'm hoping that COVID will have changed them a little bit, but
It's a difficult thing, and that's one of the things I wanted you to be on the show, is to help bring out that message where it's so important to actually take preventative steps.
mhm.
And, your health is so important. And it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know if you can talk about it just briefly, just about the pathology of like how viruses attack the body, just
Mhm.
giving people understanding, and how chiropractors, from my understanding, what I was taught, whether it's a virus or bacteria, stuff like that, it's going to affect the communication within the body. So
Mhm.
our main communication system is our nervous system. So if we're
Mhm.
not getting proper signals to the rest of the body, let's say, for example, our immune system. So if that signal is blocked by a subluxation of a vertebrae in a particular area, now, is that usually in a thoracic or cervical that's usually in that area? Or is it something, a combination of stuff that kind of affect it?
It can be in different areas, but on a whole, your brain is the central part of the nervous system. It's like your motherboard, you know? So when that system is not functioning and not doing what it's supposed to do, well then yes, the information can't be processed properly. But I want to go even farther as to say that what I've been discovering lately, which I've heard before, but now I'm going into even more, is that a lot of it comes from our gut. So actually, there's a lot of, if you look it up, or you can find it all over the internet, a lot of people talk about the gut as your second brain. But in reality, some think that the gut is actually our first brain, because a lot of our immune system cells, our immune defense systems, and the hormones that produce them are found in our gut. So in reality, if we look at how we've evolved before we became, you know, the statue of the thinker, that we were driven by our gut. We woke up, what did we do? We found food, because that's what guided us, right? And so I was surprised to discover how much of serotonin, which is important to our balance and health, majority of it is created in our gut, not in the brain or elsewhere where I would have thought, right? So yes, having a subluxation, which we would think mainly from the cervicals that are blocking information from the brain, but even if you have one in your back or in your lumbar area, and that information can't send signals to your brain, then that's also a problem as well. So low back pain, subluxation, and now with COVID, we're all sitting way too much. Bad posture. I see you correcting yourself.
I know, it's like, okay, bad posture. And it's like, you know, it's interesting. And it's like, I was just going to say, it's like, man, I got to go see you. Like, you know, because, you know, computer, neck, everything. Yeah.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
but all of that makes the difference, because in reality, there are actually, they say, more information, more pathways leading from the gut to the brain than there are actually pathways leading from the brain to the gut. So what does that tell you? More information is coming from the gut to the brain. So that's why we get hangry, you know, when we haven't eaten and we can't think properly, because our world does still center around that idea of having good gut health. So if our brain, nervous system, autonomic system is not working due to subluxations, then that's going to be a big problem. We can't fight things off when we're tired. You know, when you look at even basic animals, when is the best time to kill a snake? Right after he's eaten, right? Because he can't move, he can't do anything, he's tired. So for us, it's not the same idea, it's not exactly the same thing, but if we are fatigued or tired or occupied trying to fix other things, we can't fight off the enemy that's coming toward us, being the virus, the bacterias. So we got to keep our body in optimal health so that we can focus on these things coming at us and deal with them in the proper way. And that's what the whole idea of doing preventative exercising, eating well, sleeping well, getting your adjustments, and why that's so important to keep yourself healthy.
So it's an overall holistic approach to it. It's not just one thing, though chiropractic is a big part of it.
Yes.
It's also about getting the proper diet too. Now you made an interesting, you know, fact about the idea with serotonin in the belly. And, you know, I'm a big firm believer of using chiropractics to help with treatment of depression. And I know there's been some studies been out there right now talking about depression, and just interesting enough with, I guess what they call them, was it selective serotonin replacement, where the like Prozacs and all that stuff that's causing a lot of the problems, but it's also related to a lot of gut health. That it's a toxicity, like a leaky gut syndrome. There's been this correlation between leaky gut because the body's inflamed, it's not producing, there's no proper signals, and the body's not allowing the production of serotonin, which is I believe it's the key element in depression, the lack of it, I should say.
Yes, the balance between that and dopamine. Because you want to have a good level of serotonin and dopamine so that the whole key is balance, because if you have too much of one, not enough of another, you're not going to get enough sleep and you can't keep your mood up. So once again, the whole idea is having proper balance. And if your gut health is bad, then you can't produce the serotonin needed to calm the nervous system and allow you to get the rest you need and to produce all the other hormones that you need.
So I guess stress would be a big component of that, you know, how it just
100%. Yeah. And I think we're all a little stressed this year. Just
oh my God, so many. I mean, that's the thing. Are you finding most of the people you're treating now is basically stress related problems, Or is it a combination of just, poor mechanics, bad health? Or is it just really you noticing that, okay, these people are really messed up just because of pure stress?
I think that poor mechanics that was already there has now increased. So right after the first shutdown, we had quite a few people who didn't come because, well, they might not have realized that we were still open. But then they were just at home in the grind because now they had to shift from working at work to working at home. There was a small population who they're happy because now they don't have to travel to work, they're at home. But for a lot of people, it's been more stressful than actually going to work, because now you got out of your home. If your home was a stressful environment, you got out, you got to see people. Now you're at home. Some jobs are demanding more from you because they just figure you're there and ready to work 24/7. And also some people don't have proper work environments. So I've had patients who've told me they're actually going to get rid of their kitchen table. That's how small their apartment is. They don't have space for a desk. They were sitting at their kitchen table, hunched over. So now they have to get rid of make a choice because they're not going back to work anytime soon, buying desks, buying chairs, lining up to do it. So all of these are stressors, plus they're hunched over, and they're now getting rid of their kitchen table so they can have a desk to work at. But now once they eat, they're going to be hunched over. So they might be better for work, but when they eat, they're going to be hunched over. So it's just trying to balance, once again, which one is most important. But a lot of stress issues trying to figure out what to do with the kids, because now your kids are learning at home. That was a nightmare for myself, trying to get my kids to work from home. They're not online people. They need practical, hands-on, see someone in front of them and not through a screen. Although my 15-year-old spends half her time like this, but
Yeah,
So,
it's a different generation. Like, it's so funny when,
totally different.
myself growing up, computers were like very much non-existent. Cell phones, they were more like bricks at the
Yes,
time when
I
you first
remember
came
the
in.
first one
You
in
remember
the
the
90s.
bricks?
Yes, the Motorola heavy flip where, like, if you attack me, I can throw this at you and I'll be able to run because I'm going to hurt you if I throw it
Yeah.
at you. Whereas now the kids are looking at me and I'm like, you're too young. Like, can I get a phone? I'm like, no, you're too young. I said, my first phone I got at 22. They just look at me and laugh.
Yeah. I'm trying to think when I got my first cell phone.
I was in university at 22.
I think it was after college. And it was interesting too, as well. Like, I just figure it was less stressful without it.
Yes.
That's what I try to
100%.
do. It's like, if I'm going for a walk, I leave my phone home. And people go, what do you mean you
Mhm.
leave your phone home? It's like, there was a time in my life where if I was going to visit somebody, I would call them up on the landline. That's what we did. And
Yes.
then you knew that the person was going to show up. Nowadays, like,
Yes.
you don't know if the person's going to show up or not because they
Yep.
just text you and go, hey, I'm not coming, and blah, blah, blah. It's so easy.
Well, here I have an anecdote for you about that. Is in 2012 in Paris, or in France, the major phone company called Orange, which would be equivalent to our Bell Canada, had a massive shutdown. The phone
Really?
lines went, like, I don't know what happened. To this day, I don't even know really what happened. The towers went down, like everything shut down. So imagine this is a Friday afternoon, the day school lets out. So the beginning of July. Like you said, before, people told you, meet me here, we'll be there on time. And then you just waited for them, right? Now, nobody's telling you that. They're just like, okay, when I get there, I'll give you a call. Except nobody could call anybody. It was chaos, absolute chaos.
Wow.
So you had, imagine European train stations, the major train stations, people are leaving out early to go away on vacation. It was madness. Nobody, so you had a couple of people who were on different networks that managed to call people, but otherwise you get spotty text messages. It was absolute chaos. And that's when you realize how dependent that we have become and that nobody shows up on time anymore, because you used to be able to call people. Or I'll even take you one back. How many phone numbers do you memorize, Michael?
I can barely memorize one. I used to know, that's the thing. I used to know so many, like, again, memorizing that. And I used to be pride myself on that, is that, hey, I can memorize these. But now my best friend that I've known for years, I'm the struggle to remember her phone number. No,
Yep.
if I don't have it in my phone, I'm done.
The funny thing is, I can remember old numbers because we used to dial them so much. But the newer ones I don't remember. But I make it a point of memorizing. I think I memorize my kids' numbers so that I need to call them and I know what it is. I made them memorize my number just in case. And I have about 3 or 4 numbers, like my parents' number. I can dial them all just in case the phone dies and you have to get another phone, because that's another problem. We end up in a pickle. And what do you do? Who do you
Yeah.
call? How? And
Yeah.
you're struggling to try and find a charger. How do you do it? And this is also another thing that we are doing to ourselves in terms of not having the muscle memory anymore. We've become extremely lazy in reminders, in phone numbers. We just leave it all up to the devices. And this, I think, is also playing a role on our body and things that we do as well.
Yeah, I just had a couple of conversations with some naturopathic doctors, and one of them, we talked about the immune system and electromagnetic frequencies and the disruption on that. So we went down that rabbit hole, and I commend her on that, because there seems to be this hidden rule that you're not supposed to talk about certain subjects. And I think she was very cautious of what she could say and what she couldn't say. But, you know, I'm not a doctor, so the great thing about it, I can say whatever I want to a limit, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll find out. I'm sure I may get a few notices that says you cannot say that, but that's kind of the great thing about having a platform like this. You can actually discuss things that normally don't get discussed and you don't see inside of that. And that's why I find it so important to, especially something I know personally that's helped me over the years. Like I've been seeing a chiropractor probably since I was 10 or 11. Over the years. So, I mean, I was introduced to chiropractic at a very early age, and there's so many different things it's helped me with. And I always tell people, and I always get in this argument, you know, I always hear the same thing. Well, they're either they're quacks, or I went to see a chiropractor and he made me worse, or she made me worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes I go, well, how does that happen? You must have been really bad. And it's just, you know, the body's trying to be aligned. So there's always that kind of like, yeah, it made me worse. So if I had to ask you, what makes a good chiropractor? If somebody's like on the fence when it comes to chiropractic, what could you say to them to kind of maybe shift their mindset when it comes to chiropractics?
First, I always tell them, you know what? I'm not going to say that we're all good, because like in any profession, you have good and bad. That's just a fact. So you have good doctors, good chiropractors, bad chiropractors. That happens everywhere, right? So we're not even going to try and sugarcoat that. Yes, you may have, I don't know the person, but you may have had one bad experience, but you just shouldn't stop at that one experience without trying another. So, but then I try to explain to them what it is that I'm looking at, what it is that I'm looking for, and what they should look for in the future if they are trying to look for a chiropractor. Questions to ask, and to see if that person is listening. I think the first thing in the medical profession on a whole is what might be lacking for some is that they don't listen, whether it be my own personal colleagues or other doctors, surgeons, regular GPs, is that this is a profession of listening. It's full of a lot of aspects. There's the physical aspect, there's the emotional aspect, there's the chemical aspect. And if we try and separate them and not look at all of them together, then that in myself already is the first step of not being a good chiropractor. Because what people tell you, even though as they're telling it to you, might have nothing to do with what you might look at, but it still tells you something in there about who they are, their state of mind. And sometimes you ask people straight questions and they tell you something and they say no. And then as you're talking to them, because you have them talking, you realize, well, didn't you just tell me you've never broken anything? And then they're like, oh, that must have been in 1995 when I fractured my toe. I'm like, but I just asked you if you broke your toe and you told me no, you know? So there's other ways of pulling information. So I think above all, in the beginning, it's listening to your patients and adapting what you do, because we have a large spectrum of techniques. So if you have someone that's only stuck on one technique, then that can be a red flag. That person might be great at it, but we're all going to get stuck. We're all going to get stuck if we only do one thing. So if you have different ways of treating something and that you're able to listen to that patient, I think those are the two main things that you should have when you're looking for someone. If you can't discuss anything with the person, how can you trust them with your health?
That's good advice. So what are some of the questions you would ask? So let's say, for example, you weren't a chiropractor, but you had to have some questions asked about trying to find a good chiropractor. What are some of the questions you would ask?
I would ask them, what techniques do you use? We have different names. The patient might not know all the techniques. Some patients might know some, like yourself, because you've been treated for many, many years. The person should be able to explain to you what that entails. Also, their philosophy. How do they work? What do they look at? Those type of things is the beginning of, I want to say where they go to school, but not really, because you get people who go to a certain school who are great, and some people come out of that same school and they're not so great. So I think it's more about their philosophy of what chiropractic is, and see if that adheres to you, because mine might adhere to you, but it might not adhere to your sister. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess it's an open-mindedness. I think it's also an education too, as well, because I've noticed the different techniques from chiropractors, and it's interesting. There's a lot of them out there, like that just can't move bone. Like it's incredible. Like you go to a chiropractor to actually move bone, and the techniques are just not there. And you can see that, and you struggle with that. And it's like, I was like, okay, that didn't work, because I know my body well enough that you didn't get that joint. There's no way in heck you got that joint.
Yeah.
And it's just,
but the funny thing about that is some people don't want that.
Really?
Some people don't want, yes, some people don't want that. So I have learned over the years, whereas I was the bone mover, but in time, based on either pain level at that time, if they're really acute, you can't move it at that first try, or also having to adapt to patients that need to be treated, but they don't want that bone moving. They can't handle the sound. They don't want it moved. So I've learned to work with fascia and work in other ways, mobilizing in different ways other than just straight bone moving. So that's something I had to learn over the years and accept and adapt to, because some people don't want that. So you get those patients that want that bone moved, like yourself, and then you get those patients that, oh no, anything but that.
That's really interesting to me, because the whole concept is adjustment, from my understanding, is that you want to be able to move the joint so that it alleviates all the other things that are going on within that joint to cause, whether it's the inflammation or anything else. But it does make sense. Like, I mean, if somebody's in pain, of course, you're not going to, I mean, that's just practicality. You're not going to sit there and go, oh yeah, let me just dynamically adjust your neck rate if they got neck pain. You know, I get that part of it, but yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I would never even think about that. Like, to me, that's the whole thing. It's like, if you can't adjust my bone, like, why am I even going to see? I'll also go to a massage therapist.
But it's different. But it's different. And I mean, I even have colleagues that do energetic techniques, which I have difficulty with. I've been treated that way, and I have felt better. I just don't think that corresponds to me, but they do that remarkably well. And I've had patients where I'm like, I think that's what you could use, even if it's not forever, but in a period of time. But yeah, for example, I had a patient who had in France who was a police officer, motorcycle accident. He came in, didn't have x-rays, absolutely wanted me to adjust him. I said, no, I'm not adjusting you, but he needed to be relieved. So I worked on him different ways, working with fascia, and thankfully, because not everyone lets you know, and I'm a proponent for letting me know if it didn't go well, as well as when it does go well, both. You know, you don't want to just hear, well, that didn't go well today and you didn't do anything, because it can happen every now and then. We're all human. But I also want to hear when you're happy. And luckily, I could tell he was really upset with me, because I've treated him for months, years, and he wanted me to adjust him. I said, no, I'm not doing it. He's like, but you know, like you got to move that bone. I said, nope. Treated him the way I thought I should, and got a message from him after. It's like, oh, thank you. I feel so much better. And I didn't move bone, at least not in that lumbar area that he absolutely wanted. There was other areas that I could have, but I really worked on the fascia in other ways. And in the end, he realized that's what he needed, and he felt better, which is, in the end game, that's all people worry about.
Yeah, I think maybe I should clarify the idea about moving bone, because with your fascia technique, because I've experienced your fascia technique, and it was the first time I've actually experienced it, and it really threw me off. But you're still adjusting and still moving, but without the traditional dynamic techniques.
Yes.
I guess that I should probably clarify, when I speak about moving bone, it's like moving the joint, and you know, correcting. I should say correcting the alignment of the joint or the bone itself, instead of just
recreating movement as well.
Recreating movement
that no longer has movement. Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of having it like the dynamic adjustments there, but that fascia technique was really, really cool. Like, you know, because you do a little bit different techniques that I know myself, I'm very much the understanding of energetics too as well. I react very well to energetics. And, you know, the muscle testing that you do and those different techniques and the fascia release, I mean, it was really interesting. It almost reminded me of like a cupping technique that the Chinese medicine doctors do when they have the cupping and they have the suction there, but you actually used your fingers and pulled that up, and I could feel the release. And it was like, because if you don't get it one way, you try the other way. And that's what I really admire about your technique was like, okay, that's so cool. That is really, yeah. It was like, I could feel it releasing. I was like, all right. Yeah. Because, you know, it is built up a trust because I've seen Dr. Trim for years. I know her technique.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's like dating. It's almost like dating. You got to go out and you got to kind of see what's going on. You got to feel what's going on the first date. But then, you know, it's like, wow, this person, her technique is really impressive. So I want to ask you just briefly about, you know, kind of the muscle testing that you do, because it is a little bit different that I've noticed. I mean, I'll call it muscle testing. There's probably a correct name.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
So is that something you learned in France, or is that a technique? Yeah. Is that something you learned in France?
Yes, but it's called, you can learn it here. It's through seminars, because that's what's great about, well, any job. Not everyone does it, but I really like going back to seminars to learn. And so we weren't taught that in school. I did seminars called AK, Applied Kinesiology, and some other ones through really good chiropractors that are well known in the world, like Jean-Pierre Mersman and Piet Suru, God rest his soul, who's passed away, and many others, David Leaf, that teach those techniques. And at first, I remember, the funny thing is, when I was away at school in the US, we had a chiropractor come in. And I remember him doing those techniques, and I'm like, what is he doing? Like, I thought he was a little crazy, but I'm like, but at the same time, like, wow, he did this and it is better. Like, you know, what is he doing? And then fast forward 15, 20 years later, I'm doing them now, and people are just like, whoa, what is going on? But yes, it's all about the neural connections. So what I like to explain to patients, your muscle isn't necessarily weak. It's just that your structure is not allowing the muscle to function properly. So we can have weak muscles, but majority of the times it's that because your structure is twisted or not sitting right, your muscles are unable to contract and be used to its full potential. Kind of like a boat. You know, a sailboat, if the sails are, and the structure of the sails are not properly in place, the sail can't open because there's not the proper tension, or if it's off. But once you set everything correctly, then the sails can open and that boat, it takes off. And our body is kind of the same thing. And when we come back to what we were talking about earlier about sitting, another big one for people in terms of that fascia and the muscle testing is your diaphragm. People forget how important their diaphragm is to them. Without your diaphragm, you cannot breathe. But we've all gotten to this stressful upper thoracic breathing and not using the lower part and fully extending our diaphragm the way we're supposed to, or using those muscles that are in between our ribs, the intercostal muscles. So I always say you use it or you lose it. So if you're no longer using those muscles because we're hunched over, right? Yeah. No, too high, or lower it. If we're not using those muscles properly the way we're supposed to, then they tighten up and then we can't breathe. If we're not breathing properly, getting enough oxygen in, then all the other chemical functions can't do what they need to do. We need to get oxygen in the blood, down to our muscles, and even to the digestive system. So it's a chain reaction. Everything is linked. Our structure working well, getting oxygen, chemical processes. So that's why the muscle testing helps us to see where those processes are not working. Structurally, things aren't in place. And then even chemically, something's not functioning properly.
Yeah, because I just know that when you first start doing that and you're pressing on my diaphragm and moving that, it's amazing when you, like, it's like my body is so out of whack. And then you start pressing on the diaphragm and it's like, okay, there's something there's something I'm aware of, but I'm not aware of. And at the same time too, it's just like the body starts to shift automatically. Yeah. It's almost like this automatic response. It's like, oh, I needed this. Oh, yeah. This is great. Yeah. And it's amazing that it's the diaphragm. And you think about it, oxygen, they always tell you to breathe deeply. You always hear that, whether you're doing yoga or anything else and you're stressed, it's always just take a deep breath. take a deep breath. But if you can't take a deep breath because everything else is out of line, that's just going to elevate the thing, because you're not going to be able to get that balance of chemistry, because you got that O2 in, but again, you're not releasing all that CO2 either, which is interesting too.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Very, very, very cool. I love that. Now, another thing that you do too as well, which is I want to talk briefly about, is concussions.
Yes. Oh,
now,
yes. I mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah. And it's really, really interesting to know that, especially from your sports background, are you seeing more because our players are bigger, stronger, faster, or are you just seeing that because people are more active that you're seeing more concussions?
I would say that it's more so because we're more aware. I think concussions have been around for a long time. We just didn't know what they were. Or when I say we didn't know what we were. We knew that someone hit their head, but we always assumed that you only had a concussion if you got hit in the head. So that is the big thing I think people are starting to realize, is that even if you get hit in the body, you can still have a concussion. Because our brain, as we see it in a book, is not this solid structure. When we're alive and moving, it's actually liquid. So if you're running and you're looking back to catch a ball and you don't realize somebody comes to stop you and you hit that person, you stop, but then your brain goes boom, boom, boom in your head. And that's where you get a concussion. It's like a neurological storm, right? And that's what I think it took a while for people to realize. So I think that we are bigger, faster, stronger. But I think now people are more aware of it, and they're not afraid to say that they had a concussion. And then we're realizing that concussions are happening in all spaces. My son was in his bed, typical preteen boy, all excited, and goes to lie down and hits his head on the side of his bed. Okay. And where we're realizing how important it is to treat these concussions, it made him angry after. Even as a mom and who treats concussion, I had to take a moment to step back and his personality has really changed. And they noticed it at school because of that concussion. So we really need to take a look and really treat these concussions, because I'm starting to see patients who have missed out on sports. They were really good, but their concussion never got treated. And it's creating depression. It's creating mood changes in people, anger. It's creating a lot of societal issues that we didn't realize actually was linked to this concussion. Problems in school, lack of learning. So it goes deeper than just the concussion and the pain. It's actually creating life changes in people.
So would the pathology be similar to like a stroke victim in some ways? As far as, because it sounds like, because obviously there's damage to the brain in certain areas, depending on where you hit it, right? So whether a stroke is the frontal lobe, in the limbic side, or wherever the stroke is, the blood vessel is broke, it's causing damage. So the concussion, it almost seems like it could be similar to like a stroke. Like, you can have different, not all things, but it's just similar, I should say.
I would say it's different because often in a stroke, you have parts of the brain, depending on the level of your stroke, that will die.
Okay.
Because the brain often in a stroke, if you take it as a full-on stroke, or if you have what we call, I don't want to mix it up in English and French. I think in AIT, in English it's TIA, transient ischemic, I forgot the name. Either way, when it's just transient, it means that you had a blood clot in one area, and so your brain lacked oxygen, so you might see signs of it, but then eventually it gets through. When you have a full-on stroke, often there's areas of the brain that die and that create issues. Whereas in a concussion, it's more of like I said, an electrical storm. So you haven't really, I don't want to say you haven't damaged, you haven't necessarily permanently damaged the cells. This is why an MRI or a CT scan won't necessarily show you anything. If we're doing that, it's more to see if there's not a brain bleed. Whereas if you do one of those exams, you can actually see the stroke there, right? Do you see what I mean with the difference of it? Whereas someone can have a full-on concussion, but you take those exams and you see nothing. So in that sense, it's different. So but you can get... Yes.
Oh, sorry. So I was just going to say, so how do you diagnose then? If let's say you do an MRI or a CAT scan and stuff like that, and you don't really see any damage or anything happen. So how do you diagnose the concussion?
Well, the group that we work with at the office called CCMI, Complete Concussion Management, is amazing. They've created a whole system with database and standardized questions that help you. So if you're an athlete and you've done what we call a baseline test, it's a lot easier because we've now, for example, you come in, you're a hockey player, we'll say, Michael, come in, we do a test, we take your baseline. So if you do happen to have a concussion, we will do all these tests and compare what your values are to pre-concussion. And then you can see that difference. So it's a little easier. If you haven't had that baseline, these questions are still helpful because you shouldn't be getting a 3 and a 4 and a 5 on some of these questions. There are typical things that let us know that you've had a concussion: dizziness, loss of consciousness, although you can have a concussion without loss of consciousness. If you feel nauseated unnecessarily, massive or worsening headaches, things like that will allow you to know that you've had a concussion due to those things. So those are signs that are pretty standard. Neurological changes, if all of a sudden now you're slurring your speech or your vision has changed, those are all signs as well that you've had a concussion, even if you haven't had the baseline to compare it to. But
So
we often compare it to other people of the same age group as well.
So would you recommend if somebody's son or daughter is actually involved in contact sports, stuff like that, to go get baseline testing?
100%.
100%, yeah.
My kids have had it, and they've also had concussions, so it was a lot easier for me to compare. It allows you to have people get back and be more reassured that you're releasing them at a time when you should, because now they're back to their normals, whereas you're comparing them to other people's normals.
So one of the questions I was thinking about is, so is there a specific age range where, I know it seems like depending on where you are in the world, there's, contact sports started at different ages. In the US, it's different than Canada, stuff like that. In your opinion, would you recommend people getting contact sports later when they're, more 16, 17 versus like 10, 11, 12?
I don't know if it would be that late, and I think it depends on the sport. But that's a good question you brought up, because one of the reasons they've shown that kids tend to have more of an incidence of concussions is because of their neck strength. So you know that little bobbly toy you see in cars, where as the car is moving, you see the head bobbling? Well, that's kind of what kids are. And neck strength has a huge impact on how you deal with concussion, because if you can contract and protect your head, you can diminish a little bit of the effects, right? So that's also why they say it's not really heading the ball in soccer, for example, that will cause a concussion. It's because as you're going up to head that ball, someone bumps you and clips you, and now you have whiplash. So whiplash is another major component in concussions. Same thing for a football player. Usually the defensive players, they know they're going to go in and hit you. So we naturally contract ourselves and get ourselves prepared. The wide receiver or the offensive player that's trying to run around and then gets hit, they didn't have the time to prepare. So in answering your question, yes, I would say contact sports a little later is always better, or doing exercises to help these kids to strengthen their necks so that they can better prepare in case something happens would be a good idea as well. But yes, that's also an important point to bring out, that whiplash is a major aspect in concussions, and why getting chiropractic adjustments along with any other treatments you might get, cognitive or whatever, is super important. Because if that neck is jammed, you'll do everything else, you'll feel better, but some people still say, I'm a little off still. It's because their neck is not back to normal, and that's creating some of those symptoms that they're still experiencing.
Wow, that's really interesting. So concussions in general, I guess it really depends on the individual and the type of concussion, the length of downtime and recovery process. I guess it varies really.
Yes, it varies on your state prior, how, if you were injured or not. And what's really important is if you've had a concussion within a certain period of time before getting subjected to another concussion. That's important. And I think that's the biggest education part, and why we try and tell parents and kids and coaches that if someone's had a concussion, please leave them out, let them recover, because there's a reduction in their energy levels. And if you get another concussion in that low peak of energy levels, that's when the danger happens. And that was what we think happened to Rowan Stringer, to why we now have Rowan's Law in Ontario, and her parents combat to really fight to get the education out so that no one else has to go through what they went through, because she had a concussion. They knew about one, and they think she had another one prior to another one she had, and unfortunately it wasn't totally recovered. And then that's what makes, the more you get concussions subsequently before healing will also increase the recovery time.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years, like especially watching football over the years, where you see a lot of the top quarterbacks and stuff like that, and you hear them like having concussions, and then another concussion, and then another concussion, and then it's just like one after another, and because that's the mentality is like, I'm fine, I'm a tough guy. Let me just get some cortisone shots in the back of the neck and whatever else I need to do to get me on the field, and and I'm out there, right? So I mean, you being an athlete yourself, I mean, you probably kind of shook in your head like, wow, man, there's some crazy stuff in order to get back on the field, and there's that pressure too to perform, which is and
you see it with everything, concussions, leg injuries. I always tell people, honestly, but for concussions, that's a different level. I'm like, this is your future health, because at one point or another, you're going to stop the sport. Is it worth being unhealthy afterwards? Are these 5, 10, 12, even 20 years compared to your lifespan worth the damage you're creating? I'm not so sure. But even with other injuries, when you look at people, I said, really, why are you getting a cortisone shot to go back out there? If you are Neymar or Cristiano Ronaldo and you're making, I don't know how much per second, then I guess I kind of get it, right? But other than that, I mean, is it really worth it doing all those things just to get back out there?
Yeah.
So
that makes total sense, because, I always say that the probably most important thing in life is your health. And when you don't have it, you so appreciate it. Like, you really don't. And I mean, I've been ill my whole life and struggling with ailments, I should say, sickness, disease, injuries, so many different things. And it's like, you just got to have it. And when you don't have it, the simplest things, that just walking down to the store and you can't do it because you have a bad back injury, it's really important. So if there is one thing that you can leave our audience with, a little bit of information or wisdom or a little bit of inspiration you can give them, what would you say to our audience right now?
I would say the biggest thing that I've really learned, and I try and share with patients, is that you can change things at any time. Don't think that you're too old. I had someone say that to me recently. It's like, oh, I'm too old to fix my health. We're not. A lot of things that we were told were hereditary. In reality, it was hereditary because our parents did it that way, and then they did it for us that way, and then we continue to do it that way. So if you really want to take your health into your own hands, do some research, talk to people that know, and just know that you can change your health at any time. I had a patient who was overweight, and I forget what happened to him, but he decided at 39 that he was going to change it. He lost 50 kilos, so over 100 pounds.
Wow, fantastic.
And went from the couch potato, desk worker, never doing any sports in his life, to a marathon runner at over 40. So, I mean, it is doable. You have to do it properly. Don't try and get up and do it from one day to the next. Okay.
Take your time. Yeah.
Caution. Don't think you can do that from one day to the next. It took over a couple of months and years, right? Yeah. But just know that you can do it. Health is the new wealth. That's the phrase we're hearing a lot, but it's important. Just take it into your own hands, inform yourself, and just know that food is thy medicine. So no matter what you're doing, if you're not eating properly, you're not going to be as healthy as you need to be.
Well said. Well said. Love your advice there. And, thank you so much. So if people were looking to find you, I know you got a radio show and everything else. Where could they find you, Dr. Colleen?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Healing Limitlessly, on Instagram. Also on Facebook at Dr. Colleen P. And also I do a radio show with CBC Radio, Radio Canada in French, every other week on their daily radio show. It's called Vie Active, and the show that it's the chronicle is called Vie Active, but it's in a show called L'Heure de Pointe that goes from 3 to 6 every day. But I'm only there every 2 weeks. And also you can find us in Mississauga at Momentum Healing Arts Center, that you know well.
Yes, very well. Very, very well.
In Mississauga, Canadian Place, Tompkin and Eglinton. So yes, please come, give us a call. And you can reach me if you want to at limitlesshealingcenter@gmail.com.
Beautiful.
Limitlesshealingcenter@gmail.com.
Yeah, if you get a chance, if you're in the Mississauga area, in the GTA area, and you're looking for an amazing chiropractor, highly recommend yourself and Dr. Trim.
Yes.
Fantastic people, fantastic. So that being said, Dr. Colleen, thank you so much for being on my program. I'm sure I'm going to see you very, very soon. Probably I may give you a call after this and get an appointment. But again, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you educating everybody on chiropractics. And yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Well, you've been listening and watching the Metaphysical Mentor podcast with Michael Philpott. Thanks very much and hope you have a great day.